Good evening. So tonight I thought I'm going to put in my 25 cents here into the basket on this whole thing with which transpired now here with Senator Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson yesterday, and I think Carlson's channel it was, where Carlson asked the senator from Texas if he knew anything about Iran going into this whole Shiite thing, and that this is like the favored flavor of religion for Iran in the first place. And he asked Cruz about the composition, the ethnical composition in Iran. Of course, they're predominantly Persian. You have Jewish people there, a few. You got Turk ethnic people there. You have pretty much from every border country Iran borders to. There's ethnic minorities there, and then there's Christian people there. Of course, the majority of the people is of Muslim faith to a certain extent, and here the prevailing state religion in this case is Shiite Muslims or Shiite Islam. And there's an interesting story behind this, and the reason why Tucker brought this up, basically. I want to explain this to the viewers who may not have seen this, but this is how bizarre and insane all of this is, really, to say this at least. Back in 1967, Shah Reza Pahlavi was the king or the reigning Shah of Iran, and he was backed by the United States. And he had CIA operatives in the country, and they were actively oppressing the Shiite Muslims. And there was a clerical sect or clerical group around a Ayatollah, and that was Ayatollah Khomeini. He had been expelled out of the country, exiled, and he was living in Paris, France at the time with several of his other people. And it was from Paris that they started to plan the revolution in the 1960s, which took that place in the late 1970s. I think it was 1979. But there's an interesting twist to this. So the Shah came to a state visit to West Germany in 1967, just a few months, 6 months before I was born, or 4 months before I was born, actually. And he also visited West Berlin. And there were student protests. That was already the time when the Vietnam War was going on. So we had these left-wing student protests against the Vietnam War, against the establishment, against the United States and all of this stuff. And now came the Shah of Persia, of Iran, to visit. And they had a pretty good-sized contingent of West Berlin police officers there to control the crowd. But the Shah also had his own protective people with him, and these protective people were armed with wood sticks. Nothing really, not even batons, but just wood sticks. And when the West German students started to protest when the Shah drove by there in the open convertible, they started to beat them. The Iranian security forces beat the West Berlin students with these wood stocks. They gave them a few over the head. They whacked them over the head. Nothing really, no major injuries or any of that stuff. And then the Shah went by, and the students then started to organize, and they started to demonstrate separately from there. That whole separate demonstration then was dealt with by the West Berlin Police Department, without the Iranian, Shah close to the Shah's security forces. And it came to a breakup of that demonstration by the West Berlin police. In that breakup, one student they had singled out, the West Berlin police had singled out, got shot by one of the West Berlin police officers. And his name was Benno Ohnesorg. And the West German police had suspected Benno of being a Stasi operative from the East German Stasi, Geheime Staatspolizei, kind of a deal, Secret Service Police of East Germany. And that was actually verified then later on in the 1990s when that was true. When the wall came down and East Germany was dissolved and they were able to work through the Stasi archives and they found the full story on this. So this is all documented. If you want to know more about it, then you can Google that. Benno Ohnesorg, Ohnesorg. First name Benno, Benno. And you will find it there. That demonstration happened on June 2nd. I just had looked it up again, 1967. So that was 4 months before I was born. And that caused then basically of the formation, that killing of Benno Ohnesorg started the 68 movement in West Germany completely, in every way, form, and shape, including the offspring then with the RAF, the Red Army Fraction, and everything else what came with this whole thing. In this circle, in that 60s circle, there were several journalists and book writers, authors. One of them was Günter Grass. And all of this left-wing group there, what developed there, this extremist left-wing stuff, these people were all self-proclaimed atheists and agnostics. They didn't know the first thing about Islam, any way, form, or shape of Islam, or any other religion for that matter. There's a few of them who were converted, if you can convert over to Buddhism, especially these people who engaged in yoga and that kind of stuff. They kind of felt a connection there with the karma and all of that stuff. That was then the hippie culture, kind of what came out of this. That this was then a movement within the movement, so to speak. But the hardcore people were basically that. And I think it was Günter Grass, the German author and journalist, left-wing, total agnostic, total atheist, who actually, after this thing happened with Ohnesorg, started to seek active contact with the Ayatollah Khomeini in Paris, because they were, involved with the French 68ers in Paris there with this whole group that came with it. I don't want to go into all the details with that stuff, but you can find this easily over Wikipedia and on Google, this kind of stuff, and it will give you a general idea on how crazy this all was. And anyway, Günter Grass then became close friends with Ayatollah Khomeini. And this is how the European, or say like the German-French left-wing, the hardcore left-wing groups are basically aligned with Iran even into today. Yeah, but the roots were in this with the student movement and people like Günter Grass. Günter Grass then in 1979, this was when after Carter got elected here in the United States, and this whole thing started to unfold there with the revolution. The Shah had to flee, Iran. His son, the Crown Prince, lives here in the United States with the sister and the mother. They have found refuge here in exile, basically. But the revolution started to take on, started in Tehran by the Ayatollah Khomeini followers in Tehran at the time, and a non-intervention by the United States because of Carter. That fell in all, it turned itself over. And then when the revolution was done, Khomeini flew from Paris to Tehran to take over. And on that flight, the German author and journalist Günter Grass sat next to Khomeini in that airplane, which brought him from Paris back to Tehran, and he was holding the Quran in his hands the entire flight. A self-proclaimed complete agnostic atheist who does not believe in any way, form, or shape of a God whatsoever is holding the Quran. And this all because the West Berlin police had shot Benno Ohnesorg 12 years earlier. This is how insane this is. And now you got Tucker Carlson, who doesn't understand jack shit about any of this stuff, big-mouthing the Senator Cruz that he doesn't know what he's talking about when he says that they want to have a regime change in Iran. This is how crazy this whole thing is. Just to see. And of course, during the 1970s, if that wasn't enough, the RAF, the Red Army Fraction, the Rote Armee Fraktion, the German terrorists, they trained actively with live weapons and ammunitions in Gaza with the PLO. And the PLO was winding up kicking them out of Gaza because the German terrorists had their girlfriends with them who were sitting there on the beach topless because they were all atheists and agnostics. And here they're working with PLO and Arafat. And they're running around naked, butt naked, in an Islamic state, where this is an absolute no-no. I mean, just the head thing already is a big circus. You can't imagine if they have a naked woman there. They're gonna go apeshit, and they actually kicked them out of there. And now the left, for whatever reason, has supported them since then. And this is how we got now that the Iran ever got that far and that close of producing nuclear weapons. And at one point or another, you have to ask yourself, if you don't understand any of this, is there a regime change necessary? Yes. And the Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi, he announced on his X account now that he would support an overthrow. He's asking the government employees and military people in Iran to support this. And they want to do a 100-day transition government to transition into a democratic elected state, republic or whatever form they choose. But it should be a country for the people, by the people. Not what they had before with the Shah, with his father, and not what they had with Ayatollah Khomeini and everything what came afterwards. They want to get rid of these two systems, basically, and establish a democracy. And I'm pretty sure that from what Bibi Netanyahu has said is that he supports this. He supports the Iranian people. Because the majority of the Iranian people are not these deep, fanatic Shiites. That is a small segment in the population, let it be 5 or 10%. That was the group the Shah Reza Pahlavi had oppressed with the help of the United States from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s until 79 when Carter stopped it. And that group then took over and suppressed now everyone else in return for their oppression. This is what we have to know. Does Tucker understand any of this? Apparently from the way, because I watched that interaction, no, he doesn't. I don't know, he's probably the least qualified person to say anything in this. And does Ted Cruz understand it? I don't know. He probably has a better understanding on what and how the composition is in terms of the Shiites, the militant religious type group under the Ayatollah or around the Ayatollah system group is probably 5% at the most, maybe 10% at the very most, but I don't even think it is that much. It could be as little only 2%. So we have 2% of that particular extremist religious organization controlling the entire country. And that has to end one way or the other. So I'm supporting everything what Israel is doing, and I would think that the United States would be good to at least send these bunker buster bombs in there and let it go up and smoke this entire thing. And then hopefully the IDF and the IAF can take out all the remaining, rockets and missiles Iran still has, and especially the launch vehicles, because if you have no launch vehicles, you can have as many missiles or warheads or whatever you in a stockpile. You cannot launch them, they're not flying. So that would be the ideal thing. But this whole thing is so bizarre and twisted, on what political side. And then the MAGA movement here in the United States, these people are only concerned with what happens here in the United States. They do not understand of what the details are somewhere in Iran, how this came about, and they have never heard of Benno Ohnesorg and all of this crap, what came after they killed that dude over in Germany. Because I lived through the hot autumn of 1977 as a child, and I can tell you this was a scary time with these RAF German terrorists kidnapping people, politicians or labor leaders and important, executives during that time. And then in Italy, you had a similar group there. And then you had in France, these groups, and then you had them in Portugal too. And there was a lot of turmoil there, and it was not a pleasant time. And you would see police armed everywhere with machine pistols, and it was like, you knew there was a difference. 1976 was very different than that what transpired in 1977. The hijacking of the Lufthansa plane, the killing of where these terrorists had killed themselves in a prison with weapons which were smuggled in by their lawyers, and all of the stuff which transpired. It was a utterly insane time. And that all happened during the chancellorship of a social democrat, of Helmut Schmidt. And once Kohl came into the picture, all of this kind of stuff kind of died down. There were very little terrorist activities. There was the 1989, I believe, they killed Herrhausen, the CEO of the Deutsche Bank, in a very vicious attack, but it was never again the same of what we had experienced there in the mid to late 70s, from say like 75 on. That's when that all heated up. And then 79 came with the Iranian Revolution in there, knowing that the European, the German left and the French left, the extremist left, was involved in it. And these are all agnostic people, atheists. And they're supporting a right-wing form of Islam, And you wonder, do these people even know what they're doing? Do they even have an understanding of what that means, what these Ayatollahs or their belief system, incorporates, and how this is presented and how this is going to transact itself in a state form? I don't think so. But this is what we got. So we need to get the left wing out of there and forget about Tucker Carlson. I mean, this is just irrelevant what he has to say on this. With that, these were my thoughts. This is my opinion. I live in a free country, and I hope you enjoyed the video. We will be seeing each other here soon. You have a great evening.